4-part series. These webinars will spotlight the transformative power of partnerships, featuring contributors to the second volume of The Notebook. If you're not familiar, The Notebook is a collection of art, scholarship, opinion, and insight that holds a divergent space in a traditional world, existing somewhere between an academic journal and a popular magazine. By blending the perspectives of academic research and lived experience, it expands the conversation about justice and safety to render a more complex picture of these issues. This volume that we'll be discussing today is centered on the theme of solidarities, the people, the work, and the practices that lift our energy and bring us together. Friendly reminder, you can download the notebook for free at our website, which is justicehappenshere.yale.edu. And you can also order a printed version on our website. You should have the link to that. So throughout this webinar series, our panelists are going to share lived experiences, research insights, and on-the-ground strategies that illuminate how solidarities take root in addressing some of the nation's most imminent threats to safety and justice today. Today, we are fortunate to have experts in the community violence intervention field speak about their article, Between Two Worlds. And before I introduce today's panelists, I want to give a shout out to Hector Rodriguez, who is the incredible artist that created the accompanying art in this article, which is right behind me here. Hector was incarcerated for 30 years and is now pursuing his MFA. His art appears on both the cover of the notebook and throughout, accompanying several of the pieces, including Teny and Andy's piece. So I wanted to make sure we all saw that. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our 3 panelists today. First up, we have Sam Castro. Hello, Sam. Thank you. It's actually my first time meeting Sam, so thank you so much for joining us. I'm really excited to get to talk to you today. Sam is the Director of Strategic Initiatives and Partnerships for Institute for Nonviolence Chicago. Sam has been doing outreach work for over 10 years with a variety of organizations. He started with Nonviolence Chicago as an outreach worker, but his relationship building and crisis mediation skills quickly moved him to the outreach manager position and eventually as the Director of Strategic Initiatives and Partnerships, where he oversees all the programs, services, and acts as the main contact in Austin for the city's most comprehensive anti-violence plan, scaling CVI for a safer Chicago. Okay, next we have, probably needs no introduction, but Teny Gross, who's the founder and CEO of Institute for Nonviolence Chicago. Teny founded the Institute in 2016 and now serves as their chief executive officer. Before that, he was the executive director of the Institute for the Study and Practice of Nonviolence in Providence, Rhode Island. His 30 years of street outreach and mediating conflicts among sworn enemies led him to his work in Chicago. And next up, we have JC, Justice Collaboratory member, Andy Papachristos, who is the John G. Searle Professor of Sociology. You've got quite the bio, Andy. Let me just say, I'm going to read it all, but the director at the Institute for Policy Research and the founder and faculty director of Corners, the Center for Neighborhood Engaged Research and Science at Northwestern University. His research aims to understand how the connected nature of cities, how their citizens, neighborhoods, and institutions are tied to one another. So we are very proud to host the 3 of you today. Just for all of our attendees, I see you. Thank you for being here. We will have a Q&A session at the end of the conversation today. So feel free to submit your questions. We're monitoring them, and we'll make sure we get to them at the end of our webinar today. So let's start with some questions about the notebook in particular and about your experience contributing to the notebook. So Andy and Teny, you co-authored this piece, Between Two Worlds. Can you, first of all, maybe talk a little bit why you felt your work was a good fit for the notebook and this way of sharing a story? And then also, the article includes both of your perspectives, Andy as the researcher and Teny as the practitioner. How were you able to weave together your unique viewpoints? Did you learn anything new about one another's perspectives as you were writing this?
So thank you again for having us, and so glad that Sam could join us, and Teny. So Teny and I have been working together fairly closely for over a decade. We've known each other for 15 years, and when we both landed in Chicago around the same time, we started a really a lot of deep conversations from quite literally one of the first conversations Teny asked me is, like, how do we measure peace? And how do we look at and measure the beloved community, some of the Institute's core principles? And, as a scientist, you're like, how it's too vague. And I was like, no, we're going to figure this out. Like, how do we think about the real elements around safety beyond what we usually measure and push? But more importantly, how do you do it in deep partnership, which was something that I think, and Teny will correct me if I'm wrong, was missing in this space. And we both also came, I was born and raised in Chicago. I came back as the city was building this community violence infrastructure, which was truly a first of its kind. And you see the Institute being on the ground floor leading. They were not afraid to ask tough questions and actually wanted tough answers. And anytime somebody would give them easy answers, they'd ask for more and more. And, as a researcher, you couldn't ask for a better thought partner. And what I found was the questions just started getting better and the science just started getting better. But more importantly, it wasn't detached. And the name of our center has the word engaged in it. The idea is doing it grounded in the work, making sure we're doing our role as researchers to measure, to push things, to challenge things. But every conversation we would have, every time we would visit, our team would be on the ground. We'd find 10 other questions that we would want to answer. And so over this last decade, we've written the academic papers, we've written op-eds, Teny's written op-eds with himself and others, and we've done stuff in academic journals, but we've been talking a lot about what does change look like in the field and where do you get it? And of course, in science, peer-reviewed papers are great, but what we really wanted to think about was ways to talk about the secret sauce, the things that make it unique. And it was this partnership, right? And I know we'll talk probably about it later, some of the things we developed with Sam that kind of underscore it that we talk about in the article, where you take detached science, bring it to the ground and see what outreach workers want to do with it, right? Instead of saying, do this, right? It really was a growth of a partnership that I felt was there. And the notebook offered an opportunity to do it in a non-traditional way. I think it allowed a lot of freedom for us to think about ideas. I think we'll talk a little bit later about third spaces. I'd love to take credit for the person who said that that was my idea in this article, but it wasn't. It was Teny's, and we pushed it, and it was a really great idea. So it let us kind of, I mean, another way of saying it, and then I'll stop talking, is what you read in that article is actually often how Teny and I talk and push things together, right? What do we need? What do we have? What's working? What's not working? What do we want to tell people that they're not seeing between researchers and practitioners in this space? So, when we came there, we thought this would be a nice outlet to explore. And this is one of the first times we've written together like this. Hopefully, it will not be the last. But it really was just a way to get some of these things down. And I'm not going to lie. I also been pushing Teny to write more too, right? I mean, he's somebody who talks about writing. I'm like, you just got to write. You know how you write? Butt in chair with pen. Like that's the secret recipe. Sit down, get a pen and write. And I forced him to do it. Sorry, Teny, I didn't mean to out you, but it was true. So he had something to work for too, and we could work together, which was quite lovely. So that's my take, and we'll see what Teny says. We didn't rehearse here, so never know what he's going to say.
And even I never know what I'm going to say. But no, you're right, Andy. Some of the article is what does it try to address? What are the gaps we're seeing, right? So uh, there's often missing in big panels, and I'm sitting next to one of a lot of funders in Chicago that just finished in policy on police reform and CVI, is we're going to be evaluated if we're effective or not. There's sort of this almost persecution, right? With uh, never the thought that people who actually work and do the work, we're extremely intrinsically motivated to succeed, because when we fail, people die, right? People forget that. Like, let's see if evaluators are going to lend some credibility, or they're going to push, make sure we're held accountable. Well, every funeral for us is a failure. We stand there. Sam often cries in funerals, right? It's people who invested and loved. So over the years, that's been something. I worked in Boston, obviously what's eventually been known as the Boston Miracle. It's much more complex than that. Providence. We know the power of CVI to change both research, but also policing. because we're a civilian force if we build it correctly. So it's not just violence reduction, it's dealing with a lot of trauma, etc. So we wanted someone that we can trust, and we saw the ethical work. So when I came to Chicago in late 2015, we did something unprecedented. We let Andy's team, David Shiro was at the time as well included, to just sit on our management meeting. They had access to the people I hired to run pieces of the institute. So if I was going to fail, and there was a real risk, and there's some moments we look back that we were very close to failure, funding, politics, this is really complex. Well, they had a front seat, right? So this was a gamble, but it's the right transparency to do that. And it was kind of a feasibility study. It's what we try, and we had to change what we were doing. Initially, we were going to build a small boutique organization to try and impact other practitioners. But you had the Laquan McDonald crisis in Chicago. Police dropped their stop by 90% in 2016. And we opted, instead of just building an organization, let's reach out to partner and build an architecture. So we shifted mid-course, and Andy's team was there to watch it and assess it. And I think we're all the better for it, right? We are like, it's going to sound wrong. We are like corporate leaders who want to get better and better at what we do, right? People forget that. So bringing in researchers, but we also knew that Andy is not going to say it works or it doesn't work, right? Which we never do with policing. Different police initiatives get evaluated, but you never say, do we need police or not in that city? Whereas with CVI, there's always some researchers, and they use a lot of economics, etc., that sometimes exceed what they actually know. And we don't feel that with the Corners team.
If I could add just one thing, which it relates to your question too earlier, which is one of the things that happened really early on and that I learned and was most proud of was really digging into not just the question of does it work, but what is the work, right? So this is a field that's actually been around for a long time. We've had this transformative period this last decade, but practitioners really wanted, especially the Institute and other folks and partners in Chicago, they actually wanted to know, like, what does it mean to do the work? Not just like, are you out there interrupting violence, which you're doing, but the work is so much more. And the best research always missed that, right? Even the best research that looked at evaluation, it would just look at it like, oh, it started in what's your average effect size, right? For all the jargon, that means they give you a percentage and it dropped it by this or it increased it by that. But how do you know, we were learning and being pushed by the Institute and Teny's team in particular early on because we had this, they opened their doors. All of a sudden it was, well, like, how are they recruiting participants? What are they actually spending their time on? In addition to, mediations, transportation, mental health, mentoring, making sure somebody's got a shirt for a job interview, let alone all the services in case management. So we were able to like track it and learn it and understand what it means to do the work beyond sort of, what catches a headline or what a researcher might traditionally look at in those models without shying away from the does it work question, but really looking into how do you capture the essence of the work, which is really important. And by the way, it's important in other fields, right? We do this in teaching, we do this in medicine, we do this in law. When we look at the legal profession, we do it in all these other spaces, but in this field, it was very binary, right? Does it work or not? That's all they cared about. And we were pushed and we were so excited to like really dig in to understand like what does it take to do this and what does it look like? I feel that that's a game changer for the space, not just, our relationships in Chicago.
Yeah, hearing you talk about that in the notebook I have like a little intro letter, and I sort of quoted this thing that you and I spoke about a while ago, Andy, where you just sort of say like people think that this work is easy and that it happens sort of quickly, but the truth is that it takes like decades of sustained partnership to get any measure of success. And I think that was actually one of like sort of the big picture takeaways from this piece was that you found this way to work together over a long period of time and just sort of like not lose momentum and not give up and continually sort of adapt to what success looked and felt like so that you stayed committed to what you were doing. Sam, I want to switch to you real quick. the title of the piece is Between Two Worlds. I would love to understand what that means to you and maybe how you feel that you are maybe sometimes between two worlds in your role.
Thank you for that, and good afternoon, everyone. And first, I have to acknowledge it's a pleasure and honor to be on this panel with these two brothers who I love and respect with a wealth of knowledge and be like, let's push back and go deeper. So thank you for that, both Andy and Teny. So for me, it's both worlds and figuring out what's best for the people. Um, so the work sits heavily on my heart and soul, as Teny says. When someone scores, I suffer, and when they go back and score, I suffer with the other side. Um, but just believing in the mission and the vision that I can make it safer for them. And the important part is, how do I translate that to them? When you're talking to them, and I think about one of the guys early on when I worked with, when I was like, bro, I need you to get an ID. And he's like, I know who I am. I'm like, great, that's not the way society works, right? So when a person is in this hamster wheel and they're used to doing this, and you want to introduce something new, people are afraid. But I think one of the things that has helped us in the field is them being able to rely on us. They can always miss a beat, lose a phone, this and that. But as the practitioners, you have no room to ever miss a beat with them. So when those phone calls comes and there's a tragedy in the neighborhood, when you respond and you help them walk through that process, and then when they see that there's a way out, you're getting there. And I think we have different moments when the guys on the street are asking. I think about one of the areas in particular that we work, when they're like, hey, those guys across the street, they need a park. And I'm like, you want them to have a park? And they're like, yeah, Sam, they don't have a place where their kids could go. And in my brain, I'm like, that's kind of crazy. And then I tell Teny, he's like, all right, we're going to reach out to the city and get this done. So it's them seeing that there's something different. And I would say this, that the satisfaction that hits my heart when you have these guys saying, nobody cares about us. Before the Institute came into our community, it was us, assault rifles, and big cars. Nobody was outside. Nobody was playing in the park. The Institute came and you did that. And I'm like, well, we didn't do it. You guys allow us in the space, and you allow us to show you that there's a different way to do it and how. And they were receptive to it, of course, with setbacks. But when they look at you like, man, they got something different, and we always there no matter what. And I'll say this and I'll pass it on. I was just telling Teny the other day, in their mindset, we always tell them, I'm here for you no matter what. So I was talking to a guy, and he like, so if I was to shoot at my ops, you're gonna be mad at me, but you promised me that you would never give up. And I'm like, I should have not have told this guy this. But the reality is, as you're building this relationship on trust and then thinking about the layers of trauma, I'm like, you're right. I'm never going to give up. I don't have a white flag. I'm going to be there. So we can talk about it. But I think it's balancing that out. And of course, the live experience and my own son, who is my number one participant, I'm figuring this out.
I'm sure I echo many people when I say that you are, I'm sure, a very vital piece of the health of your community, and everyone is so thankful that you're here today and sharing. Um, we kind of started to cover a little bit, sort of like the meat and potatoes of the programming that you talk about in the article. And for those of you in the webinar, I did throw the PDF link to the article if people want to sort of read along as we talk. But let's dive into that. You guys paint a picture of your evolving relationship through the development of SOAR, Street Outreach Analytic Response. Andy, can you tell us more about SOAR and its development? And then I'll ask Teny and Sam some more questions about it as well.
Yeah, so this is I'm excited to talk about this. So SOAR, as you just mentioned, and I didn't come up with that name. That was actually, I think, Sam's team and our team at Corners were looking for an acronym. You have an acronym for stuff, but I spent a decade, in my research studying how gun violence moves through social networks, quite literally, tracing things person by person, tie by tie. So, some of this work I did when I was at Yale through Justice Collaboratory. I did it before, have been doing it since. But the idea was you could see how this stuff concentrates within real world, like humans, not just statistics. We could predict, and I use that word loosely, but you could see the patterns for how they spill over. It was always a question of how we could get this into the hands of people doing the work, right? Because every time, and actually one of the first times Teny and I met, I went to Providence to show some of these pictures about Boston up on the screen, and they saw all these little dots, and they were people that they knew. And I'd known every time I'd shown this, especially among outreach community, but also in other spaces, people wanted to know who they were, what could we do, how could we use it, and there was never an opportunity to do that. And so in Chicago, we had this moment when the teams, and I'm get corrected if I'm wrong, but everything that Sam just described, outreach workers know everything about their block, about the groups that they know. They know people's brothers, cousins, sisters, girlfriends, who they dated last week, who they played Little League with, right? But you can cross the street and then that knowledge just drops, right? So you know everything about this block, but you know nothing about the next block, right? This is also true of preachers and teachers and good cops, right? Your brain is limited. So what these tools I thought could do was give outreach workers essentially like a social GPS, just a way to look at information, to let them vet it, to give them points of intervention. And so when we were talking early with the Institute and one of our other partners, like, is this something that you'd like to do? Well, you have to come in, you have to do your shtick. Everybody looks at you, they start mean mugging you. I'm not saying Sam did it, but a lot of guys, they don't know what they're talking about. And then it happens, right? They want to know about one, they want to click one dot. And I know as soon as we do that, I know we got them, right? I know they want to know more. Oh, I know Andy. Who's that? I bet I know who that is, right? Sometimes they put themselves in there. But the idea was not to like come in and say, here's this thing that's going to change your life. It's like, there's this idea that you've been talking about. There's some science here that could help. What can we do together? And again, Sam was there, Teny was there. Then we started talking, okay, well, let's think about it as like a review thing. Can we do this every week? And then you started to see them operationalize it in responses. Well, we know guys in this part, but we don't know somebody over here. Well, Sam said it, let's pick up the phone, let's call somebody from over there. So we built these sets of tools together. But the other thing we built, which goes back to the issue of solidarities, and then I'll stop talking, was actually we built a learning community, right? And in fact, you saw people interested in data literacy, what we would call, right? You had outreach workers that were taking the lead and trying to explain things to the other outreach workers. And then supervisors started coming in with their own information and ideas, and they wanted us to do stuff. So, like, I guess we could do it. So then we would try to do it. So it was actually a way to build learning capacity in organizations. And Teny had mentioned it. Organizations got to learn, right? 10 years ago, did we think we'd be 3D printing guns at home? No, but we're learning. And the same thing with technology. We're learning. So we saw a building of a learning community and the development of some tools that we thought were useful. But like I said, we just kind of presented them and then tried to see how to build this kind of together. And we had some resources, some funding at the time to support this effort. It's gone now, but we're going to try to see if we can revive it. But we tried to build it together for something that would work in the hands of the folks that were doing the work.
And it's an interesting commentary as we enter this landscape with so much new emerging technology in general and the ways in which we can like marry those two things. Teny, so I know that there was some skepticism from your team about working with Andy's team at the sort of beginning of the relationship. Can you tell us about that and how did working together to implement SOAR change that skepticism?
So something that is national as an issue is a real issue. We see ourselves somewhat as doctors, right? Sam and his team, if I ask them who you think the next 90 days might get killed or will kill someone, they'll have some, but there is an imbalance of power in our society. Often lists represent police and the government, right? And can be subpoenaed. So, unlike doctors who can know your history and your medical condition when they jump to try and treat you, our field has always treated and healed with one hand behind our back, right? We were very cautious. We couldn't get complete information. We're very proud in our field, so we still think the best information exists in the heads of outreach. But as Andy was alluding to, we have blind spots. Let's say it's 10%. It's still an important blind spot, right? So sometimes it's positioned like if we take, there's a trade-off. If you involve data, the police might say, well, sit with us on focus deterrence list groups, analysis. That's something we're not willing to do, right? And I come from that. Boston started that, the focus deterrence, started those things. But we have since then seen a bit different. We want to build real strength and independence within community groups and not compromise and put at risk outreach workers in the neighborhood. So that means our data got to be kind of HIPAA like the medical field. So often there's a trade-off. You work with the university, the city gives you that, well, they want something back. So working on that is an ongoing negotiation in Chicago, but building that strength that we're separate. And then I think Andy's team understood it deeply. They come and meet with our team and our offices on our terrain. Information is immediately scrambled, and he can use the right terms for that. So it's de-identified, right? Am I using the right term there? And so there's not that risk, but it really, once we had to, and we as leaders, we cannot tell our outreach workers who are giving us their lifelong Rolodexes, trust us. That doesn't work. They got to see it, they got to feel it, and Sam obviously can talk about it.
I'm just going to read one quote from the article, and then Sam, I want to ask you, because I think it's a good lead-in. What we've learned through the SOAR process is that innovation happens at this intersection, where rigorous analysis meets neighborhood knowledge, where academic credentials meet street credibility, and where theory meets practice. But generating and sustaining this third space requires not just line staff and scientific expertise, but the often unsexy and underappreciated layer of management that drives and spurs innovation between them. Sam, can you give us an example of how you've utilized SOAR in your community outreach work, and how do your outreach workers feel about using the technology?
Yeah. So I got a little different to say. It goes along. So when they first thought about this, and Andy sent the staff, and I said, look, we trust Andy. I said, but I'm going to tell you, I'm a protector of my people, both in the community and my staff. I said, if you're coming to ask uncomfortable questions, only law enforcement does that. So you have to gain that trust. And she was like, Sam, I got you. I'm not going to act nothing funny. So I put her in the room with the team. Then I said, look, because I have the relationship, you guys trust me. I trust her. Let's try it. By the next couple of meetings, they were like, Sam, we don't need you. Get out of here. We just meeting with Andy's team. And I'm like, great, that's success. But I think for what happened was we was in Austin and we asked Andy and his team to do something a little special. We talked about a conflict we was working on, and something that they never do is they put people's names in the networks, because normally we see the little sticks and the bubbles and they're like, we're going to figure this out. But for this project, we were like, let's work on this conflict and we're going to put names. So as we start presenting, we see our frontline staff, and they did exactly what Teny and Andy was saying. I know him. I remember when this guy got shot, this and that. So the miracle and the aha moment was they stepped up, we stepped back, and then they made sense of the whole network. So we're in the back of the room looking at each other like it clicked for them. And these team earned the trust when they see these names with people they knew had got shot, had passed away, who they were fighting with. They were like, wow, Sam, this is what it really does. Because at times we were chasing our tail saying, how can these two guys have even gotten close somewhere to be against this other group. So when Andy's team put that together, I was like, man, we're not looking at data no more, talking about do your daily logs and case notes. We're using data to say, hey, we need this, this, this. So for us, that was the aha moment when you have street outreach workers telling us, I love data. And I was like, what did you say? Can I get that in writing?
Uh, Can I just add one thing to that? I mean, I love data too. It's also one of the ones where, and thank you, Sam, for reliving those moments, because they were really important learning moments for our team. But it's also a field that without data is handicapped, right? I mean, who doesn't use data in this day and age? And the challenge has always been, and I love the way you describe that situation, Sam, is for outreach workers and frontline workers, their credibility and experience is their capital. And it's not something that's replaced from data systems, right? And so that having making sure that that's the case, in research we often talking about have humans in the loop so that they can tell the machine what to do. We're flipping that, right? The machines are in the loop helping individuals make decisions, right? Same thing with when we're thinking about the current moment about how we use tools and technology, human intelligence and human compassion and human belief is what drives the work. But if it can help you identify things, especially when you're short resourced, right? In Chicago, I mean, where there's this effort to scale, but a lot of it is whack-a-mole or pulling threads, and the time you can save if you only have 30 outreach workers in a community of 90,000 people, how do you get across? So having a little bit of data can really change things if it relies and if it resonates with. And by the way, when it doesn't, that's important, right? If the data is telling you one thing and the people on the ground are telling you something, which happens, it's actually a great moment to take stock of like, what is going on? Is it real? Is there a glitch? Do we have a knowledge gap? And then that's where real, I think, learning comes. And, going back to the name solidarities, that's where you build solidarity, figuring some problems out, rolling up your sleeves, doing the work, taking the lumps, some maybe taking the laps too, but like more often than not, it's fixing something. Lumps and laps. I should write that down, by the way.
If I can jump in, thanks for Carolyn for letting me. So two things I want to say. One is we have a chance. I look at teams of outreach and the work in different neighborhoods. The institute is that I often say is at 30% of quality. It's important when we manage things that we don't. Some people say, oh, they tell our team, you are the best team, and we absolutely. It's not true. And when we sit also with the data, it's important. There's really weak spots. We had a shooting outside our office that never happened before. And it was a day after a homicide in another neighborhood that we were sluggish. It was late at night on following up. Wait a minute, other consequences can spill somewhere else. So being reminded of that, being honest and transparent about that. So I want to say a word on Chicago. Chicago didn't join the rank of some of the East Coast and West Coast cities, right? Why was it? We thought about that. Some things was really around policing, and they haven't changed the way some East Coast and West Coast policing changed. Some way it was politics and investment, and we addressed that. So this is a complex problem, right? The data is helping us figure out. Just so people who are not familiar, what is the scale of the work in Chicago? We had in the last 60 years over 40,000 homicides. Maybe 82% is African American. That is a catastrophe. There's almost no family that hasn't been touched. There's a grief level. This is 5 times more than the Marines in Iraq, your risk if you're a high school dropout, right? This is something to understand the scale. In Austin, the neighborhood, one of the 4 neighborhoods we work at, 1,600 high-risk people who are either shot or involved in shooting. That's quite a tackle for a neighborhood. 53 rival groups that Sam's team mediating non-aggression agreement, not peace agreement, but non-aggression. So that takes scale and intention. In the last 9 years, because we came together in a sophisticated way with 60 funders, now the business community, different layers of government, we invested about $1 billion. The story of Chicago that is not out yet, we're not really telling it, It's not just violence reduction. We're actually trying to touch root causes. 2,000 people now either employed or on stipend in peace operation. It's a different way. The models before that I was part of was kind of more decapitated, focused on the shooter. This one also says we're going to enroll you in GED, college program, employment training. It's more ambitious. It's risky, but I think that's what justice calls for.
Thank you. This is the point in the webinar when I wish I had some sort of a jingle I could play that's like current events. So I would like to give you an opportunity to sort of talk about not just the article, but sort of what's going on right now in your lives in Chicago. And I'll just remind our listeners, we're going to have Q&A, so start throwing your questions in there. So I would love for you to talk a little bit about, because I know the relationships you've built in Chicago and at the state level in Illinois that have helped sustain your work. How would you advise other cities? Like, it's one of the questions people really want to know is like, what advice would you have for us, other cities, other CVI organizations to build these sustained relationships of support at the city and state level?
I'll start. Don't be transactional. Okay, elected officials are human beings, right? You got to work hard to show that you're going to add value. You got to have a reputation, even if I don't understand always the rationale of what they do. They hear noise in the system, whether it's effective or other people, but they got to see a sincerity of effort that's part of it. Then I think we do a lot of presentation. We have Andy, we have Boston Consulting Group, we have others that constantly feed data and information. We're responsive. Funders text us on Sunday, on a Saturday. What's going on? Why are you flat? It's a relationship. There's 60 foundations that are now involved, and they wanted to just seed it. And we told them, you're not seeding the Art Institute of Chicago. You've been funding them for stay the course with us, right? It's really important because you're also a check on political power. If you're the MacArthur, if you're Joyce, etc. So making sure managing a lot of them is like managing groups on the street, quite honestly. The team laughs that they know who my crews are. We're not using the word gang. My crews are in that level. The same with Andy. So that is really, really important. We have a lot of bosses and we need to accept that, right? Whether it's foundation, whether it is big organizations than us, et cetera, government.
I actually liked Teny's answer, so I'll build a little bit to it when it's possible. I think the first thing I think that was really foundational to the successes we've seen in Chicago, and by the way, when I mean successes, the big success is having built an infrastructure or ecosystem or architecture. We use a lot of different words. I like the architecture or infrastructure, which was different, right? So 20 years ago, if you looked at outreach organizations, they looked a lot like gangs in the following sense: was they fought each other for nickels and dimes to keep the doors open and lights on. And there was no coordination, even though working together made people stronger. And so, in Tenny's point about it not being transactional, I think one of the key things is who are the players? How do you coordinate rather than foster conflict among the people who are trying to bring peace? And I think that's really hard when resources are scarce. I mean, let's not pretend that that's not true. But I think getting people to standardize training, share information, coordinate calls, if somebody's group is not in your, again, to something Sam was saying, if someone from group is in another neighborhood and you want to contact them, share the information, right? We're talking about working together. If you can do that, you start to build things, and you want to build things that last. Bad things have lasted 150 years in Chicago, right? We haven't pulled up the expressways that segregate the city, and yet they still segregate the city. How are we going to fix that? Building this sort of infrastructure is been very robust for a decade, but it's also at this key turning point, which is, people are using them for peace. They're doing that right now, but it could very easily kind of crumble as things happen in the world. And I think that is really one of the key elements. I will also say, I'd mentioned in passing, and I don't want to just say everybody needs to do that, but having some partner in understanding efficacy and impact is non-trivial, right? I actually think it's impossible if you're asking investors, whether they're state or public. And by the way, sometimes the state is worse, in terms of what they're looking for, specifically ROIs and, and the things like that that you can't even answer in the best data when it's election season will come out. But having somebody to track and to look at and to engage as a thought partner, I also think is vital because otherwise it just looks like it's part of the political wins when it's not. But trying to think about building, I mean, and I know there's some comments that were in there. You're trying to counter all the big stuff, the root causes, by building some roots, right? And you do that in this way, and it's hard. It takes time, and sometimes you got to pull stuff up and blah blah blah. But actually, that's really the key of what we've seen and how every city is different. One of the good things about Chicago is people are willing to give money to Chicago like they weren't. And I was in Connecticut for a long time. It's hard to give people to give money to New Haven and Hartford and Bridgeport when New York and Boston are right there, right? And it's a hard game. And I will say this as a hypothesis, but when we look at the nationwide decline, it does coincide with massive investments in the community infrastructure, right? It's going to take us years to disentangle this. That happened as arrests went down, as policing departments scaled down a tiny, tiny bit, but not tremendously so. So there is something about investment in communities, especially with the ARPA dollars, that has had some kind of effect on what we're talking about. And I think that that is one of the things Chicago did we build things in Chicago. It's what we do, right? We raised the city 6 feet after the fire. We reversed the Chicago River, and we're building community infrastructure. We build stuff, uh, except hopefully not a Bears stadium in Indiana. Let's
Right.
not let's not do that.
Listen, as a Kansas City Chiefs fan that just got the stadium moved from Missouri to Kansas, I'm just gonna say, there's sometimes that some people are happy.
We'll leave those
Anyway,
Las Vegas Raiders fans alone, though.
yeah. I want to stay on the theme of Chicago because I think you're right. Like a lot of people are paying attention to Chicago right now. Sam, and all of you really, but Sam, tell us like how would you describe the current atmosphere in Chicago these days? What are your priorities?
So one of the things that I believe that is a success to what we're doing is violence preventions and intervention organizations. We pushed ourselves into public safety, where they're looking at us as that, right? So when COVID came, looting, rioting, we was there for the people, selfless. We knew that we didn't know who was gonna make it after COVID. We was there. And then I even think about with the ICE. So we went to stopping and helping prevent violence to outreach workers in the Latino communities. Our outreach workers were there in the morning because ICE was striking in the morning. They were there in the afternoon when the kids were getting out of school. So outreach workers was posted up in the neighborhood to making sure kids got back to their school, from school, home to school. So one of the things that people might say, like, well, you guys just respond to shooting. No, it's not that. We wear a lot of different hats. There's a big gray area more than what's printed. But also being part of the CVI ecosystem, right? We're proud about the professional understanding that we built with law enforcement to be able to get the CPIC information so we can respond 365, 24/7. That's important. Also building those relationships with the mayor, deputy mayor. When they have questions, they'll hit us on a Saturday, be like, Sam, we want to talk to you, go to the office. I'm like, we don't know when we're off. So I'm like, I got you, right? We're for the people. So I think that because we've built that strong infrastructure, the CVI ecosystem, that we all lean on each other's, and even bringing in the faith-based organizations where pastors are saying like what we can do. One of the things we're like, all right, we're going to jump on a train and pass out pub with them, bring out resources. So we're not just the old guys going, there's a shooting, let's go. No, we've gotten past that because we got to think big now.
Kenny, do you want to add anything about Chicago? And then we can start with some questions.
I mean, I think Andy alluded to it. It feels we built something incredible, and there's so many people in the mix, and yet it also feels fragile. when you actually look very soberly about it, there's a few key people. Trying to build leadership when there was trauma and there was a lack of trust is not an easy thing. 19 of the staff at the Institute are in a college program we bought from Providence called College Unbound. Sam is one of the graduates with a BA degree. Developing people after they've been excluded from the table is not a quick fix. So I think keep educating us. We're not a Japanese society that thinks 500 years ahead, right? We quick fixes. So making sure it stays and we keep building. And the experiment that, I had a choice a few years ago as a leader in the city. I was at Teny, we have a chance to add more people to the roster of staff and stipend participants. Are we going to dilute the quality? They posed it as a question for quality of people when you have a small team, a lot of quality, when you're going to bring it back. And I said, yes, you're right. We're going to dilute the quality, but if I have a chance to hire people, Black and brown community who are excluded, poverty levels unbelievable, and criminal background, we're going to go for scale. And that means, is there an investment in leadership that is matches to the amount of people? There isn't. We are really feeling breathless and always exhausted. So that's a real dilemma we haven't solved with all the generosity. Yet I'm feeling uncomfortable a bit to say that because Chicago now has investment that other cities could only dream of. And I used to operate with no resources in Boston and Providence. So I cannot cry like, oh, we need so much more. But if you want to properly reverse years of neglect and violence and do it properly, we're going to change the mindset of at least in Chicago, people don't say we don't have money, which is always what I heard on the East Coast.
We have a couple of questions coming in, and one of them was something that we've talked about before, so I'll just read it in case you guys can't see the questions. But in the article, you touch upon the challenges of properly evaluating CBI programs when certain kinds of evidence are privileged over others by academics and even the philanthropic landscape. Can you talk more about how you overcome these challenges? Does this require you to try and find the evidence privileged by those groups? Are you able to successfully convince them using evidence they may not ordinarily favor? And this kind of also goes, we talked about before this, CBI has been under pressure just with funding, federal budget cuts, stuff like that. So if you could sort of handle both of those, I think people would be interested to hear.
Yeah, so start with the easy ones. I'll kind of give a high level one, where this is concerned, which is I often say that, not everything is science, but science isn't everything. And, our job is to try to measure the world as accurately as possible, right? And I think there is a very strong base in a certain area of science that uses words like gold standard as if there is a singular gold standard in science. Often this is equated with the randomized control trial or a clinical trial, and we try to medicalize everything, and anything that you can't do that to is somehow lesser. We often talk about pyramids of evidence and so on, right? Now, there's all kinds of data that exist. Some data are amenable to randomization, some are not. And so often when you have evidence in try to gather information like we're talking about, people want to layer clinical stuff on top of it to say it meets a standard or it doesn't, right? As opposing to understand that some of the most important discoveries in science never came from a randomized controlled trial. We would not have seatbelt safety laws, tobacco laws, or even know that the earth is round. Spoiler alert for the flat earthers, it's round. Without basic science, right? The scientific method is you have a question, you gather data, you investigate the data, and you do it again and again and again, and you build evidence. It's not based on one method. So I think there are a couple of culprits for this. One, we overcorrected in the 80s after a bunch of really important things when people started talking about Willie Horton and the welfare queen, when all you needed was, and it's still true, all you need is one case to dismantle everything, right? So then people started to try and put standards in place, which is important. And let me be clear, there's a lot of good evidence, there's bad evidence, but then it kind of came like, if to do that, we have to make it clinical, everything clinical. And this is a field that eludes that. Gun violence is not random, right? So even when you try to randomize, and people have tried and they've been more or less successful, Statistically, it's just impossible to capture what you're looking for. But we have all other types of methods that are rigorous and pass muster, and yet they often get diminished. And so I actually think part of the way we try to combat it, which we often lose, is in front of boards, right? So most boards for funding agencies have an MBA or they've been JDs, and so they've taken an Econ 101 class, but they've never taken a Sociology 101 class, right? And so they have a certain framework where they've been enculturated into a certain framework, even though the scientists should know better. And then sort of there's just one view of what science is or science could look like. And we just know it's not true. But when it gets into the public space, because the senator wants to get up and say this is gold standard research, right? They want that phrase. Platinum is pretty good too, and so is silver, right? And I'll give one really important example. When we look at whether it's the sort of gold standard folks or silver, whatever, the risk of the people that they're working with, it's the Institute for Nonviolence, CVI, are so off the charts that even if you had a 50% reduction, which would be unheard of in any other program, they're still 4 times higher than the rest of their neighborhood, right? So the win with a big percentage drop is still really bad, right? It's like, so we just need to understand what we're talking about. Or when people hear a percentage and it's like 30%, isn't that low? You never. So one of the things we're not talking about, as Teny alluded to, 35% drop in homicides in Chicago. If you had a 35% return on anything, like you should be writing home about it right now. I just saw that mortgage rates are below 6% for the first time in 6 years. That's like a 2 point change. We had a 30 point change, right? So it's like we don't know how to consume all the evidence, and there's this sort of weird uh, fetishization of certain approaches over others. And let me be clear, there's really bad science out there, right? And actually, we can see it. There's a process for it in science, peer review. But the sort of it's more about the marketing of science than it is, about sort of the actual on the ground how we do the work.
I think there's still a big gap between the research community and the practitioner, right? So I make sure that, like 2 days ago, I got a book by someone pretty well known in the RCT community, right? An economist and I get criminology magazines, and I know a lot of the researchers. So if we could, the happy medium would be, to me, if people understood that we respect science, we wanna get better. There's a lot of blind spots, sorry, in what we do. But also the research community, and I'm in that, this sounds really arrogant. They better study sociology and Greek philosophy. You're not very civilized if you just do numbers. I'm sorry, in your education, because humans are complex, right? When you sit in the middle, Sam yesterday pulled in some of the leaders from around the city. We have a massive conflict that started around Christmas downtown that affects 7 neighborhoods. How do you address that just with data, right? And the complexity of people. And if you forget someone in, and how you, it's a book about diplomacy, for example, right? International, maybe diplomacy should be brought in. So there's so much, and that is not, sometimes we get stuck with you're for science or you're against science, and it's the opposite. We need science, we need to improve it. We need to also acknowledge how much we don't know yet, and that's okay. So I think that's where I would like to see more of us together, really, as allies on that.
Mm-hmm. I just also want to say thank you. I hope the panelists can see we're getting a lot of responses just in the chat and people thanking you for your time and the way you're talking about this. I just want to do one more question so we can try and wrap up in about 5 minutes or so. But there are 2 questions that are sort of getting at the same thing in the Q&A. One says, can you say something more about partnering with police and mayors? The other one says, I understand you are looking for greater cooperation with policymakers. What would this increased relationship look like? Are you looking for more financial support, public awareness, ... So I think there's just, I don't know, Sam or whoever makes the most sense, some curiosity here about what cooperation looks like with local policy makers, whether that's police or mayors.
I'll take a crack at it for law enforcement. So one of my tasks is to make sure I create a good relationship with the four commanders and deputy chiefs in the districts we work. And it's simple in Teny's word. You give us information, we give you nothing. But it shows a proven concept that when they understood and value what we bring to the table, all of our districts that we work have less shootings and homicides. None of this is perfect. We're just humans figuring it out. So I meet with them. And the thing is this, so I can go meet with them versus my frontline staff because he can't do it. Because if something was to happen and they see him talking to law enforcement, somebody go to jail, that means he told. Then you got to back out of that. Me, it's a little bit different. I go do that. And it's we say it's a professional understanding to protect us because if a reporter puts this Institute for Nonviolence they got a relationship with the cops. Now people are gonna say we're snitches, and then that's a problem. My job is to make sure my people get home to their loved ones. But I think about the relationship that we build, whether it's an event on the South Side in the summer to make sure the community is safer. We had one of an outreach worker who got shot while doing the work, and we all went to the hospital and we couldn't get in. I call the deputy chief. He sends the tactical. I tell my natives, be cool, we're gonna be all right. They come right back outside. They're like, Sam, your man straight. We just talked to him. He's just in pain. So those things make our life easier. And it's always trusting the process from law enforcement to think those were gang leaders, drug dealers, shooters, killers, from our guys to say they're going to do something bogus, they're going to put a gun on you. So it's trusting the process. But I say that in Chicago, at least in our district and a lot of districts, we've gotten into a better space with their leadership that we can just pick up the phone and vice versa. When they have certain issues or people coming out of jail, they'll call and say, Sam, I got such and such. He needs some love, get in his life. I'm like, we're going.
So I'll add to that. There's a former chief of police who was the son of a medical doctor that said America is a cyclops. It watches things. It can focus on one thing at a time. And this requires to do multidimensional, right? Like I have books in my house, and we had a staff person who sued and won $13 million settlement from the police for double homicide, wrongful conviction. So we got to live with what has been done that was damaging, and mistrust. At the same time, we have a goal that we want our society to rebuild the middle and the trust. At the end of the day, outreach is not going to save alone the community. A black neighborhood deserves the same policing and government service as any other community, and it needs to be done well. Sometimes we shy away, we stay just in our lanes. It's a bit more risky to cross. I've seen in a 35-year career, we've seen it in Chicago, people told me it ain't going to work. Their police commanders and officers will now say, we changed their policing. They see living examples of people who change, who used to be the menaces, who are now amazing peacemakers, who are getting their degrees. So that getting close with the right boundaries, it's a risk that we have to take. We've got to rebuild the middle of our society. I don't want to always win arguments. I'd rather win hearts. And that is a big difference.
Thank you. Thank you to all of our panelists. Thank you to our attendees. I have been getting some questions, and yes, we did record this. It'll be up on our website, so feel free to share it. And I'll just do a plug for our next webinar, which is on March 24th. And that will be the wonderful Vinny Schiraldi and Seema Gajwani, who worked to do this program called Safer, Stronger Together initiative in the state of Maryland. And they'll be sharing insights on leveraging interagency collaboration and something called community action boards to reduce crime and improve outcomes for youth. You can register in the same place you did for this, check our newsletters, check our website. And of course, please do not forget to read the notebook. I threw the link to the website in the chat. You can see Andy and Teny's article plus Vinny and Seema's, which we'll be talking about on the 24th. Thank you so much. Really appreciate you all. And thank you all for attending. Bye, guys. Thank you.